Let's explore how we can create directory listings. That is, if there's a folder that has a series of files, then how do we allow the user to pick the file and browse through it, just like any set of files would be served on the web. Now, let's look at how Filehandler works. By default, when you create an app, you have the default Filehandler. It takes an endpoint and it maps it to a path. And this creates a configuration. We do have options to specify a default file, an index file, and an index. What I'll do is show you how these work behind the scenes. So let's go to the code editor. And in the code editor, we have a configuration that says the home page must map to index.html. Instead, what we're going to do is map it to a directory by adding index colon true. What that does is if the pattern matches a directory, then it will list all of the files under that. So in order to do that, one of the things that we must do is change the path to a directory rather than a single file. So instead of YAML path, which is the current directory where gramex.yaml is, slash index.html, let's just say YAML path. So now this page will show all of the files under this particular directory. Let's preview that. We'll open the application by launching it. And what you see now is instead of the index.html getting displayed, you see all of the files that are in that directory. Let's go back and make a few tweaks to this. We'll go to the code editor and look at how we can specify the default file with a different file name. Now, what this does is if there is a default file, the home page will pick it up and render it. Like, for example, if we said the default file is index.html, then it will show index.html. But if there is no default file, then it will just show the list of files. So you specify the default application, the default file by saying default underscore file name colon index.html or any other file name. If I said index.html, then let's reload this. It would render index.html. If instead I specified something else, let's create a new file. We'll call this, let's say, new default.html. And in this, I say this is the new default. Change this to new default.html. Then it renders this is the new default. But if I deleted the new default HTML file, let's delete this file permanently. In other words, if the file is missing, then it will render the list of files. So that's what index colon true does, and it works along with default file name. Now, the style of this application is, or this page is what comes by default. This is the default index template. You can change that too. The index template option gives you the ability to pick any other template. You can style it your own way. Now let's take this as the simple and trivial HTML file that we can use to modify the template. So if I created a new HTML file, let's say a new template.html, and inside that put in a heading which says $path, and just below that I put in the body. What it will do is generate the template using this if I specified the index template as new template.html. Now, let's take a look at how that works. It has the heading and it has the body. Let's see the source. The heading is nothing more than the folder name, and that's basically the path. The body is a series of list elements which have a link to the file and the name of the file. And then the next list element, which has a link to the file name and then the name of the file. So we can structure this using HTML and CSS any way we want. So for example, if you wanted to add a style to this, we'll create a new HTML file. And inside that, we'll add the heading and the body. And the body, let's say we put it inside an ordered list so that we can see the number of each of these. Let's see what that looks like. Firstly, the title should change to a file listing, and we should see the file numbers coming out here. Now that's rendering the contents of the file as an ordered list, and you can see that the code is reflective of what's in our file. So that gives you the ability to then further style this in the HTML file any way you want by adding CSS, HTML, and so on. So, in fact, what happens behind the scenes when we don't specify an index template is that it uses a default index template. And that index template behind the scenes is doing a certain amount of styling for the same heading and the contents that we have. So that's what allows us to create a directory listing. If you want to disable the directory listing, use index colon false, and that is the default. So index colon false will make sure that the file that you specify is exactly what is rendered. And now it says you haven't really specified a file. There is no file called slash. So the path now has to reflect an actual file rather than a directory. So if you change that back and there's no need for a default file name, that will give you the home page as index.html once again.